On today's show, Tari Eason's Houston Rockets season in review, expectations coming into his second NBA season, growth that we saw along the way, some of the frustrating outcomes of only playing 22 games, as well as questions that we have regarding Tari Eason moving forward, as well as one game, one play, one number that stand out from the games that he did participate in this past season. We're going to get to all of that and so much more here on today's Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Mondays. Be sure to follow along wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. Just search Locked On Rockets. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. That's the best way you can help the show out, is to comment anything below on YouTube. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, a 5-star review helps us out tremendously. Now, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more with FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. Guaranteed. It's $150. Win or lose. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. And as always, thank you so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day, whether it's on your way to work, on your lunch break, in the gym. Thank you for being an everydayer. Joining us now is your weekly co-host, the Podfather himself, Rockets Wire editor and host of the Logger Line podcast, Ben DuBose. You can track down on Twitter at Ben DuBose. Here as we continue our season review series, now focusing in on Tari Eason, who had, albeit a disappointing, a frustrating year, right? Marred by injury, not nearly the impact that we would have liked to see Tari have here in the first year of the Ime Udoka era with the Houston Rockets. But we're still going to review Tari's season. He still deserves his own season review show because there was some good to be taken from his season. And I think there's some really important questions that, when it comes to Tari Eason that we can discuss here as we're taking a look back and kind of reflecting on what we can reflect on from this past season. Only 22 games to look at, so not a huge sample size, but right, coming out of the gate, Ben, this was a really weird year because Tari, obviously, he gets the injury early on, and, we don't know. There's a lot of is he going to be available? Is he not available? Wasn't there at the start of the season, and then essentially played on what we found out later was basically a broken leg for the 22 games that he did play on before ultimately having season-ending surgery because of the tumor that was actually lodged on his leg.
It was a frustrating year. It was, by and large, an encouraging season, I would say, because he improved. You look at his numbers. I know it was a small sample, 22 games, but he played basically the same minutes as his rookie year, 21.5 to 21.8. But he basically improved across the board in terms of scoring, rebounds, shooting percentage, three-point percentage, win shares. Everything had a slight uptick despite the minutes being level. And that's exactly what you would want to see in year two. And the Rockets were 12-10 in those games. So Houston did get on track late in the season. That's how they rallied to 41-41. But for much of the year, it was a tale of with Tari and without Tari, because they were above 500, a winning team when he was out there, even won 3 of 4 against the defending champion Nuggets. And when he wasn't out there for most of the season, they were below 500, although they did make that run late in the year. I would say by and large, it's encouraging because he did not only take a step forward, but he actually showed a bit more playmaking than I expected going in. I think we all knew going into the year that he was a very versatile front court piece. We saw as a rookie, he provided insurance for Jabari Smith Jr., who it makes sense that Jabari was a little bit behind Tari because he's a couple of years younger, didn't have nearly the college experience, but Tari was more ready in year one, and so he provided some insurance there, also for KJ Martin and even Alperen Sengun at times. But in year two, one thing that really stood out for me was his ability to even provide insurance for Jalen Green. When Tari was at his best, which was in December before the leg injury flared up again, and he briefly got off a minutes restriction, that was when Jalen was at his worst. And we actually saw in a couple of wins in December, Tari finishing the game as the 2 for the Rockets in place of Jalen Green. Ime Udoka even threw out a young Kawhi Leonard comp for Tari Eason. And of course, Ime coached a young Kawhi Leonard in San Antonio when he was on the staff of Greg Popovich, and Ime would not throw something out like that out there lightly. So I would just say for Tari, it's frustrating that the sample wasn't very large, and there is still the question of how his style of play, which is sort of a wrecking ball when he's out there is going to translate to a 30 to 35 minutes per game role, which is what the Rockets ultimately want him to play as good as he is on a permanent basis. So there's still some questions there. It sucks we didn't get to potentially resolve those in season 2. But in terms of what he could control, he looked really good when he was out there, and he actually overachieved my expectations because I did not think, if you had asked me in October, would Tari be able to close games in place of Jalen Green, I would not have bought that. And yet by December, he was doing that in big wins for the Rockets.
Really? You wouldn't have bought that? Because see, here's my thing is, and I know you said, he's closing games at the 2 for Jalen, air quotes around 2, because in my mind, right, obviously today's NBA is so positionless, and it's just,
it is.
I didn't view it as him closing games at the 2 necessarily. It's just like he was one of the 5 best players on some of those nights where he did close games. And as long as you have a primary ball handler out there, which the Rockets did, in Fred VanVleet, and then you just throw out the plethora of rings, right? So you could have, Tari, Dillon, Jabari out there. Those are your wings. And then you have Alperen and Sengun as your lone big on the floor. So I didn't view it so much as him replacing Jalen in the lineup, more just his skill set was more crucial to those games, and he was one of the best 5 players to warrant closing those games.
Yes, but I would say that role is important in terms of spacing. And that's where you can see an incremental bump from year 1 to year 2, not just in his three-point accuracy going from 34 to 36%, but also the attempts per game going up a little bit as well. He seemed more confident, and he was more aggressive in taking shots from behind the three-point line. And I think that's what made it a lot easier for him to slide in for Jalen. It's not so much that he couldn't. It's not that, I suppose, it's unfathomable. It's just, for me, I looked at him more as a front court piece who would ideally replace someone that's a little lower volume from three-point range, as opposed to Jalen. He's someone who, regardless of whether the ball is going in or not, he's respected to a degree from behind the three-point arc. He commands that sort of space on the floor from opposing defenses. So for Tari to bump his shooting in year 2, that was one of the questions for him on the pre-draft scouting report, to be a solid three-point shooter at higher volume. It's not that he couldn't have replaced Jalen before, but he would have been something of a liability, to where I think it might have made Ime Udoka feel like, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. So maybe we just throw Jalen out there because at least he has the theoretical capability to make more threes, as opposed to when Tari was making those threes, then it became a lot easier for Ime to say, you know what, if Jalen doesn't have it on a given night, then you're out. Tari's in.
No, I agree with that. I agree with that line of thinking. For me, when I look back at some of what took place this season for Tari Eason, expectations kind of coming in, I was incredibly excited just to see what Tari and what Jabari specifically were going to look like playing under Ime Udoka. And we kind of saw a lot of trust from Ime right away with Tari, understanding, hey, he's an incredibly versatile defender. I can throw him out there in different lineups. Think about how long, right? Rookie season, Steven Silas basically exclusively played Jabari and Tari as the 4s on the roster. We never saw Jabari and Tari. We never saw them play together. We never saw them play in tandem. We never saw the different positional alignments where you could have Tari, quote unquote, playing the 2 or being out there in a lineup with a bunch of wings or a bunch of forwards, because Silas viewed them as exclusively 4s. Meanwhile, Ime comes in and he's immediately like, no, if I can get all my best defenders on the floor at the same time, that's exactly what I'm doing. So I liked that Ime was a little bit more flexible with some of the things that he was trying to do defensively early in the season when he did have Tari healthy. And offensively, for me, I think one of the areas that really impressed me with Tari was his, I guess, a renewed ability, and this goes all the way back to Summer League, is his willingness and his ability to attack off the catch. So some of that comes with being, treated as a threat to shoot the basketball, which I think he still was his rookie season, respectable percentage, not somebody that you're like, the scouting report says, oh, you've got to run this guy off the three-point line, but somebody that you're going to honor, that you're going to treat as a shooter for sure. But then this season, I thought he was a lot more willing to attack off the catch and try to finish in and around the cup, which is, another element of his game that needs a little bit of work on. We're going to talk about that a little bit later on. But we also want to get into some of the areas that we have some significant questions about Tari's game and, what his role for this Houston Rockets team is going to be moving forward. Questions about where he kind of fits in, what the future of this team is going to look like with the starting lineup, potentially. We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by DoorDash. This Mother's Day, get something thoughtful for mom on DoorDash. Surprise her from wherever you are with fresh bouquets, the latest in tech, gift cards, self-care treats, and so much more to make her day that much better. Look, you might have some really big plans for Mother's Day, taking her out to a nice lunch or dinner, spending time with her. But maybe you can't be there first thing for her in the morning, right? What better way than to surprise her with a gift right to her doorstep so that she knows that you're thinking about her on her special day. Get all of your Mother's Day gifts all in one place with DoorDash. Get 50% off of your next order, up to $15 when you spend $15 or more on your next flour, convenience, grocery, or retail order, now with code LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDONNBA. Order using DoorDash today. Terms apply. Today's episode is also brought to you by FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and so much more. Right now, you can take a look at the outright betting favorites for the NBA title. This season, the Boston Celtics still the favorites, even after the Kristaps Porzingis injury at plus 125. The defending champion Nuggets right behind them at plus 240. And then the Minnesota Timberwolves plus 900 in third place. So for all those odds and so much more, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right, Ben, because when we're looking at Tari, a lot of this is going to be kind of speculative in nature because, again, we didn't have the biggest sample size to draw from this past season. But by and large, we kind of know who and what Tari is when he's able to play. You mentioned this in segment 1, talking about what does it look like when you're able to eventually scale Tari up to a 30, 35 minute a night type player. And I think that really begs the question is, what is Tari's future role in this team? Is he somebody that at some point in time is going to demand a starting spot given how effective and impactful he is when he's on the floor? And what does that ultimately look like? Who is the starter that he is potentially most likely to replace, health permitting, obviously, next season? Does he potentially overtake Dillon Brooks for that starting role? Does he potentially overtake Jabari Smith Jr. for a starting role? Or is there even a world where, God forbid, if Jalen Green goes back, he kind of regresses a little bit and goes back to his level of play from the first half of this previous season, then maybe there's a world where he gets injected into the starting lineup over Jalen Green next season because he's one of the most impactful players. I think it's pretty easy to say. Actually, I'll tell you what, let's stick with that one first because I have a follow-up question that I want to ask your thoughts on.
Okay. So first off, I dug into the data when you were going through the positional stuff in the first segment, and his rookie year played 77% at power forward according to B-Ball Reference and their estimates. This year it went down to 59%. So yeah, much more wing production from Tari this year, played alongside Jabari, and my God, the on-court differential of plus 10.7 for Tari this year, absolutely ridiculous. To the question you raised here, that's one of the shames of only seeing 22 games from Tari and being limited to below 22 minutes per game because he was on a minutes restriction due to the leg for most of the games that he did play in November and December. I will say, though, some of the question or some of the answer to that question depends on the pieces around Tari, in that because there's so much utility to his potential role, then he can be used in so many different constructs. So the long-term answer also depends on the development of those other guys, like Jalen, like Amen, like Jabari, like Sengun. I would say that Tari is probably the highest floor guy that the Rockets have, in that every other player, and I'm not saying that Tari is the best prospect of the core six. My guess is that most fans would rank some combination of Alperen, Sengun, and Amen Thompson as their 1-2. But even those guys, you have to use them in certain ways, as opposed, or you have to use them in certain ways to get the best out of them. Not that they'd be without value if you used them in some other construct, but there are things you have to do to play to their strengths. As opposed to Tari, he fits in so many different constructs that I really don't think you have to, pigeonhole a role for him. You can sort of see the way the rest of your team takes shape and then slide him in wherever it makes the most sense. For me, it's less about a particular role, a particular position, and more about durability, because this year it's not his fault that he had a stress reaction in his leg. That goes without saying. But I do think that independent of this issue with his leg, there is a question of just how much of his production in the low 20s minutes per game, which is the range he's been at for his NBA career to date, can be extrapolated to the high 20s or eventually the low to mid 30s. I think the Rockets this year wanted to see what would happen if they got him into the upper 20s. They didn't get to because of the injury. So for me, that is sort of the shame of this year. Now, they'll get
when you're saying durability in this context, are you talking about, again, we're talking about scaling up his production? Are you worried that because of the style of play that Tari has, that his like wrecking ball style might not be able to be scaled up to a certain extent because he exhausts himself on the floor? Is that kind of the point?
Somewhat, yeah. Just the insane, I guess, effort that he puts into every possession, not just defensively, but on the offensive glass. Go ahead.
I'm laughing because there was a point during his rookie season, about halfway through his rookie season, where I asked him a question along these lines, and I wound up like, I basically was trying to ask him a question. I'm paraphrasing here, but something along the lines of, do you ever feel the need that you have to like conserve some energy throughout the game, or like, kind of, measure your play so that you don't run out of gas? And he hit me with a very point blank, blatant no. Like, why would I do that? Like, no, like I'm going to go out there, I'm going to give it my all every single possession I'm on the floor. And so I find it funny that we're kind of discussing this now when a year and a half ago, he like completely shut me down when I even hinted at the idea of him having to like kind of conserve his energy over the course of a game.
And that's the mindset that a young player in the NBA is typically going to have. Mm-hmm. They're at that point because they believe in themselves. However, until he does it, I do think it's a fair question. And some of it may also depend on what the role is, in terms of if he's asked to do more offensively, it's sort of a blessing and a curse. If he can be more of a playmaker, if he can be one of these jumbo wings, like, Ime threw out the Kawhi Leonard comparison, I can see a little bit of Jimmy Butler as well. If he eventually becomes more offensively, then that's great. But there is a little bit of a trade-off in that Kawhi Leonard is not nearly the defender now that he was in San Antonio when he was much more of a defensive specialist, especially those first few years. He eventually had to sort of pick and choose his spots because of the workload on offense. So that's one of the other things to watch as well. Beyond just what can Tari do at his peak offensively, also what do the Rockets need him to do? And so that's where I think with Tari, because there's so much overlap, there's so much utility with his role, a lot of the questions can't be answered strictly through his own game and his own development. Yeah, you want to see him play more minutes. That's part of it. But you also want to see exactly how he fits with the rest of the roster. How much can the Rockets fill of, say, their offensive burden through other guys on this roster, and then let Tari compartmentalize a little more? It's all sort of interconnected in that way. And so that's sort of what I'm looking for next season. At a baseline, sure, you want to see Tari play more minutes, but I also want to see just how he fits alongside those other guys, because I think that's also going to dictate just how aggressive he can be within his minutes.
It's going to be really interesting to see how Ime juggles all of it. Even just looking at the roster as is, if they ran it back, like, how does Ime juggle all this, right? He's got Dillon Brooks, he's got Jabari Smith Jr., he's got Tari Eason. That's three forwards that you could easily just split all the forward minutes between the 3 and the 4 across those 3 guys, give them each 32 minutes a night, some more, some less, depending on who's playing well. And then that covers you on your forward spots. But that doesn't account for the fact that Thompson was getting minutes on the wing this past season. Cam Whitmore was getting some of those minutes this past season. Like, you just there's going to be a minutes crunch, and certain guys are not going to get the minutes that they were getting and the opportunity that they were getting this past season. And it makes me wonder, because you look at the construction of this team, and it's felt like, I don't know, ever since like midway through Tari's rookie season, you're like, okay, he's the future heir of like the small forward spot on this Rockets team. Like, the small forward spot will one day be Tari's. But then you also start to look at the way the roster is currently built. Nobody can replace Fred currently, because only Fred can do what Fred does. Jalen and Sengun are your two like high-end superstar upside players, and you're going to run things back with them and kind of see how that looks, and hopefully that duo can hit the ground running earlier than they did this past season. And then Jabari Smith Jr., I think there's still a lot of faith and confidence for him to figure it out. He's a great complementary piece to Alperen and Sengun. I think we've still only kind of scratched the surface as to what Jabari can be as a player, which means the one piece that you look at in the starting lineup that could be easily replaced is Dillon Brooks. But that's also the position, that 3 spot is also the position where if there was an available star player to go chasing for the Houston Rockets, or a star level upgrade to make on this roster, that 3 spot is the most convenient position, where if you could go get a Jason Tatum type, whatever. Like, I'm throwing out that as a wild comp, but that's the position that makes the most sense to try and upgrade, because I think Dillon Brooks is the piece in the starting lineup with, I don't know, the lowest ceiling, or I don't want to say the least amount of impact, but but that also makes it difficult, because then what do you do with Tari, right? Like, the future for this team, especially on the wing, is so I don't know. It's a little murky as to it's bright. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of flexibility there, but I'm just going to I'm very curious to see how it all plays out. And this was the question that I wanted to ask you earlier. in your mind, if I gave you the fill in the blank, like Tari Eason is the blank best player on this team, I think he's no worse than top 5 on this team, like easily.
Right now?
Right now. Like just when you factor his sheer impact on a basketball game, and that's why
I would say top
wonder,
3.
Top three, right? Like from an impact perspective.
He's right up there with Fred and Sengun.
Yeah. So like how much longer can you leave that level of production on the bench? And are you okay with that? Or let me rephrase, does it matter if he's coming off the bench, if he's still able to get 30 plus minutes a night, right? Could Tari Eason potentially be in the running for 6th man of the year next year? We know how impactful he is. We know all the advanced metrics are there. If he plays a whole season and he's coming off the bench for 75% of it, he's absolutely going to be in the running for 6th man of the year next season.
Yeah, I don't think it matters. And to go back to Ime Udoka's Spurs comps, look, the Spurs had a player in Manu Ginobili who was one of their cornerstones that came off the bench for pretty much the entirety of that dynasty. So as long as Tari's playing 30 plus minutes per game, I don't think it matters whether he starts or comes off the bench. And quite frankly, having him off the bench probably makes sense because of the utility. Yeah, because you can plug him into so many different spots. In terms of the upgrades, I like that you said Jason Tatum in your hypothetical and not Paul George after you got ratioed on Twitter. Although I actually think that idea had some validity to it. I'm sure we'll come back to that.
I did not get ratioed. There were a lot of people in the comments that there were some people.
I was just surprised by how many people said no.
And there were some people like in a vacuum. I was like, come on, guys, we're talking about Paul George versus Dillon Brooks in a vacuum, and there were people against that idea. And I was like, let's be a little bit more realistic here. But all right, continue.
Yeah, but anyway, to the question of Tari, I don't think it matters whether he starts or comes off the bench as long as you have him as that option and he's scalable. Then he's your super sub. You can put him at so many different spots depending on who has the hot hand, and it's easy to think this team is ahead of where they are based on the close to the season. But look, most of the guys in that starting lineup are still young. They're going to have ups and downs. So I like the idea of, not pigeonholing Tari to a specific role. We don't know how his game is going to develop, especially offensively as well. So it just gives you a lot more flexibility depending on how Jalen, Jabari, and even Sengun, because, one of the things we saw down the stretch of the year was an increased willingness to play Jabari Smith Jr. at the 5. So if Sengun has a rough patch or if he's in foul trouble, then perhaps you slide Jabari to the 5 and put Tari at the 4 and you run with that as your front court. Just so many options. I think it's just a lot easier if you start that by bringing Tari off the bench.
Coming up, we're going to get into our 1 game, 1 play, and 1 number from Tari Eason's season. We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for timed tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes that you unlock. And there's so much to get your hands on. Unique stickers that you can trade with friends to complete albums for big prizes, cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with, and hilarious emojis for taunting your friends when you smash their buildings or heist the riches from their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every single day with constantly changing tournaments and different challenges. A ton include their own unique minigames like digging for treasure or robot pachinko machine. And there's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or even rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go, so get off the bench and go download it now free on the Google Play or App Store. Again, go download Monopoly Go for free on the Google Play or the App Store. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right, Ben, we had a pretty limited sample size to choose from here as it relates to Tari Eason's season, only 22 games played. But go ahead and start us off, your 1 game for Tari Eason this season.
It was the Memphis game in mid-December when he went for 25 and 14 because it came on the heels of an 18 and 14 game against San Antonio. But what's more noteworthy, and I already talked about this in one of the earlier segments, is that he finished both of those games in place of Jalen Green. And for a guy who played, the data says, nearly 80% of the time at power forward as a rookie, to have the utility to finish in place of the team's shooting guard when they're really struggling and actually show some playmaking chops. It's not like he got those points all off of putbacks. No, he made some creation plays off the dribble. He hit some tough threes, not just from the corners, but above the break as well. I went back and looked at the highlights today. So those were games that stood out. The Rockets had to lean on him. That was a stretch of the schedule where it felt like the Rockets were starting to scuffle, and eventually they did after Christmas start to lose more games, but they really had to take care of business.
That was when Ime talked about getting raggedy wins, right? Because they were really scrapping for some of those games.
I mean, they were Tari Eason wins, but they did it because they had Tari as an insurance policy, the exact insurance policy that they did not have when the wheels sort of fell off in January and early February. But yeah, just seeing Tari be able to finish a game in more of a scoring role. It's not so much can he play shooting guard, to get back to the discussion where we were having earlier. In today's NBA, there's a point guard, there's wings, and there's bigs. I think that's probably the right way to look at it. But to see him, I guess, take a role that within the construct of this Rockets team has been built around scoring and shooting. Jalen Green in year 2 was a 22 points per game player, and we expected some of us even more than that in year 3. So for Tari to be able to grab the reins in that capacity, and for the Rockets to be able to lean on him, not just defensively, but offensively, and win games, even against bad teams, that felt really noteworthy to me. So I would say those 2 games, and Memphis, because it was the second straight game in which he was used in that capacity, that's what really stood out to me.
That Grizzlies game, a career high 25 points for Tari Eason, tying his career high, which he set the game prior for 14 rebounds. And then he also blessed us with this incredible soundbite in his post-game walk-off interview with courtside reporter Vanessa Richardson.
Coaches are dogs. All the players are dogs. I'm a dog. That's just what it is.
Love that soundbite from Tari. He's chock full of great quotes. So great game of the year, or great one game for Tari Eason. I'm going to go with the one right before that one. I figured it was going to come down to these 2 games as far as the most impactful or best games for Tari. So that Spurs game right before the Grizzlies game that you picked, Ben, that was where he set his new career high, 1 game prior, 14 rebounds. And he also had 18 points that game, but he had 14 of his 18 in that fourth quarter to kind of help pull away from the Spurs. And it really felt like, again, he scored in a variety of different ways, very willing to attack off the catch, like I talked about earlier in the episode. But that win also felt like he was playing with a little bit of a chip on his shoulder. I think he does whenever he goes up against Jeremy Sohan. Ever since Sohan had those comments about Tari Eason having no lift, no bounce. So it's always fun seeing those guys, play against each other. And Tari had a couple dunks in that game for sure. So I'm going to go with that one as my one game for Tari Eason this season. Hit us with your one standout play, Ben. I'm curious if we're going to have the same one on this one.
So Philadelphia game, right before the calendar turned to 2024. And the Rockets lost this game. So I think it's easy for that to get sort of lost in the shuffle. But with a minute and a half left, Rockets were down 1. Pat Bev had just hit a big 3. Tari gets the ball on the wing. He takes a couple of seconds to survey. He's got Tyrese Maxey on him, again, because he's playing more of a perimeter role at this point. Of course, he's got a little bit of a size and physicality edge on Tyrese, and he just puts his shoulder down and attacks Maxey, goes right to the rim, finishes through his chest, and of course has to take quite a few dribbles to get there. That's the kind of move that, as a rookie, when he's predominantly playing at the 4, I don't know that Tari has the confidence to do that, to go get a big bucket in a tough spot. Rockets were down 1, that put them up 1 with 90 seconds to play in that game, in a high leverage spot, for Tari to trust his handle, to be able to put the ball on the floor and finish through a guard, basically playing as a bigger guard that can sort of bully the smaller one. I don't know that he could have done that in year 1, but it goes back to the theme that I've been saying throughout this show, which is his versatility being even more than I expected going in, being able to trust him as not just a perimeter defender, but as a perimeter playmaker at times, and to do it in a high leverage spot. Yeah, I know that he's bigger than Tyrese Maxey, but we see smaller guards, because of their instincts, because of their quickness, be able to, have quick hands and poke the ball out. For Tari to be able to make that play against Tyrese Maxey late in a big time game, that really impressed me. And again, it sort of opened my eyes even more to the idea that, hey, he's got even more versatility than I thought he did going into this season.
I was really torn because I was digging through some of the, looking back at some of the highlights and looking at some of the film. And, there's so many different moments that you can point to that are not maybe crazy big significant moments, but just little things that add up over the course of a game, right? The deflections, the steals, the blocks, this, how much space he occupies defensively. But of all those, I I then started, going through some of his offensive highlight reel, and I'm gonna be super lame here. I'm not gonna pick one that has like any greater context or anything. I'm just gonna pick a great poster that he had. It was the in-season tournament game against the Clippers. Unfortunately,
I remember this.
They lost this one, but he flashes down the middle of the lane. Jalen Green hits him with a little shovel pass, and he just absolutely hammered one home on Ivica Zubac. I mean, oh my God, the reaction from the Rockets bench. Alperen Sengun like stood up and immediately like started falling back into everybody else's arms. One of the best moments of the season. Easily maybe the best dunk of Tari's career, could potentially just a monstrous slam. So I'm going to go with that one because it's always fun watching a huge poster come down. I know that, sometimes with these, the one player or whatever, we're digging for a little bit deeper meaning or something that has kind of a, more importance in the grand scheme of things, shows some development, that kind of thing. But this one was just a nasty, filthy dunk, and I just wanted to highlight it for Tari. So,
and it's also a reminder of his elite athleticism, which I think this year, because he was playing on a bad leg most of the way, so we did not see that quite as much as his rookie year. But yeah, he's a pretty freakish athlete as well. He's not just a 3-and-D guy. He's someone that can, I've mentioned his playmaking chops a few times, but he also has some real explosion, some above the rim bounce to him that I think a play like that showcases.
All right, Ben, give us your one number from this season.
Yeah, I'll keep it short and sweet. 3-1. That was the Rockets' record against the defending champion Denver Nuggets when Tari Eason was available for all 4 of those games. When you look at the Rockets split by opponent, I would say their record against Denver is probably most important of all, most noteworthy, because that's the one top shelf team that they consistently played very well against. And I don't think it's a coincidence that Tari Eason was available and playing in all 4 of those games, because I think at a high level, the Rockets were a 500 team without Tari Eason. If they had Tari Eason, I think that's what takes them into, play in range or better. Tari Eason is the difference between them being, a nice team, a try hard, and a legitimately good team. Unfortunately, we did not get to see it for 75% of this season, but in that 25% that he was out there, I do think we saw signs that the Rockets, even against good opponents, were legitimately good themselves, and that 3-1 record against Denver, to me, is very reflective of that. Tari Eason was the difference maker to take this team from, again, a solid level to an actually good level.
Do we add the context that Jamal Murray was missing for some of those games, or do we just leave that out of this?
Some, because he played a couple. Come on,
he did.
Nikola Jokic was out there for all
the first couple. All right.
And he played in Denver when the Rockets beat him there.
I like it. Okay, that's a good pick. I'm gonna go with another. I feel bad because I feel like every time I pick a number for one of these, it winds up being a negative number. But I'm going with 45. 45 is my number. 45%. That's what he shot on layups this season. We know that layups were a problem last year. Shot 47% on layups. And again, first off, I will say tracking data in the NBA is a little finicky. So,
yeah,
it's one of those where it does match the eye test. And it continues to be a thing with Tari where sometimes he just has those finishes, right? Where you're just like, nobody's in front of him and he smokes a wide open layup, or he's going for an offensive putback and he winds up, almost stat padding his rebounds because he has 2-3 misses in a row as he's, continuously attacking the glass. Finishing in and around the rim is going to be a thing that Tari needs to get better at as his career, progresses. I'm tempted to almost say like throw out this year's number because again, it's such a small sample size. I think it was something like 80 something layup attempts this season, but at the same time, it was an issue last year. We know it's an issue that, needs to be addressed moving forward. We know that Mama Easton's going to roll up the newspaper and bust it out every time he misses a layup. So that's the number that I'm going to highlight. That's the area of improvement that, again, I want to see him next season hopefully get to a place where he's shooting, a respectable percentage on layups and not, smoking the easy ones, because his numbers could, I don't know how many times, a handful of times this season, a lot of times last year, we could have had some games where Tari could have scored 20 plus if he just hit point blank layups.
And I will say it goes back to the earlier theme of trying to balance what he does, that wrecking ball mentality on a permanent basis, with what's sustainable over a longer period. Because I think what happens, he plays so hard that physically and mentally, he speeds himself up so much that he can't do the simple things at times, like finish at the rim. A lot of those, he's playing so hard. He's trying to go so fast. He's trying to do so many different things that I just think it's very difficult to, in the NBA, to play at that mentality at all times. Sometimes, be it for your body or for just the mental side of the game, you do have to dial it back a little bit. And that's something that ideally you would have got to see him figure that out over, a gradual bump from low 20s to high 20s this season, year two. Unfortunately, his leg didn't cooperate with that. But I think that's sort of the evolution of his game for a number of fronts. I think, physically what he can handle, but also just in terms of, executing at the margins, the little things, being able to slow himself down at times. You don't want to see him slow himself down too much, but I just think that there are times, and the layup issue is one of it, that I just think that, he's trying to do too much too quickly, and, being just a smidge, slower and less out of control could help him in that regard.
Just a little bit more measured at times, right? Like dial it back from 110 miles an hour to like 95 miles an hour, and you're still going to be, outrunning everybody else, outworking everybody else on the floor. Now, this is usually the part of the show where we come up with our season grades for a player. But Ben, I think I'm going to make an executive decision here. Let's just mark it as incomplete for Tari. It's unfortunate, right? But only 22 games, not a huge sample size. Hopefully he's able to run it back next season. And I will say, when you were bringing up the durability part, I know that we took it a different direction. We talked about more just, his level of play, being able to sustain that level of play, at a higher minutes threshold. I will say one silver lining here is this Tari injury. It was like a freak injury. It was a weird thing. The tumor on a bone to prevent it from healing. Like in what world?
He had it fallen on in the preseason. This is not like a chronic injury that should recur. Like, this is much easier to treat as a one-off. He had it surgically corrected, and because it's an off season, there's no reason for the Rockets or Tari to rush back. So assuming it's given proper time to heal and it's a bone rather than a soft tissue injury, he should be completely fine.
And look, we already know he and Steven Adams are both well on track to be available for training camp in the fall for next season for the Houston Rockets. And look, I mean, he played 82 games his rookie season, no issue, right? He was one of only 10 players his rookie season to play 82 games. Him and KJ Martin both played 82 for the Rockets. So I don't think there shouldn't be any concerns or any worries about Tari's durability or long-term durability moving forward. But on that note,
and I will say, and I'll say very quickly that if you combine his 2 years, I'd give him an A, because I think there is a large enough sample. And if you had told me coming out of the number 17 overall slot in 2022 that he would produce at this level the first 2 years, I don't think any Rockets fan wouldn't have taken it. So I would say incomplete for year two, but Tari to date in the NBA, grade him an A.
I'd agree with that. I like that. All right. On that note, you know the drill, Ben. Let everyone know where to track you down at.
Yep. Ben DuBose on Twitter /X, the Rockets Wire and the Logger Line on the same, and rocketswire.usatoday.com for all your daily Houston Rockets news coverage.
Coaches are dogs. All the players are dogs. I'm a dog. That's just what it is.
That's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Rockets. As always, thank you so much for checking out the show. If you haven't done so yet, please consider subscribing wherever you listen to your podcasts, or on YouTube, just search Locked On Rockets. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. How did you feel about Tari Eason's season? As short as it was, give us your thoughts in the YouTube comments. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, a 5-star review helps us out a ton. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.